Respawn Entertainment's latest Star Wars adventure arrived on the 28th of April 2023 for PC, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series. This is the sequel to 2019's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which introduced the player to former Jedi apprentice Cal Kestis. Survivor picks up 5 years after the first game, and opens with a dramatic sequence featuring a captured Cal attempting to acquire intel with the aid of a new team, only for complications to arise.
They're everywhere.
This necessitates his journey to track down his former allies and bring them back into the fold, as they go in search of a system hidden away from the eyes of the Empire. Cal is both the protagonist and a standout character. His mannerisms and behaviour now accurately reflect someone who has an additional 5 years of life experience. He's calmer, with his abilities honed a little more. He's had to fight, scratch, claw, and learn how to deal with loss to get where he is. You really get the impression that he's been worn down by this lifestyle, but feels an intense internal obligation to keep going. He's certainly less skittish and childlike in his attitude and mannerisms, even though he still looks quite young. Everything about him feels like he's trying too hard to shoulder the weight of the galaxy, and that's certainly evident in his actions. In Cal's supporting cast, there are some genuinely likeable entities. BD1 is the standout, who manages to convey a plethora of emotions from off-pitched beeps and boops to physical comedy. For a game that really does feature Cal airing his thoughts out loud a lot, BD1 acts as a platform to bounce these off, rather than Cal talking out into the ether. I'd go as far as to say that I can see value in all of the named characters here. I like Merrin because she's just blunt and forthright. She acts as a counterbalance to Cal's somewhat self-indulgent worldview, and plays a vital part in both grounding him in reality and giving him a reason to hope for tomorrow. Mantis pilot Grease is just as excellent as ever, bringing enthusiasm and emotion to a place that has very little. Sort of like that one uncle who's a little off balance, but everyone genuinely likes. The new characters are a bit of a mixed bag though. Bode is just excellent, but I didn't feel that way until a little over halfway into the game. He initially comes off as this game's token gunslinger, even if he has his own backstory and motivations. He does just keep getting better and better and better, and he ends up being one of the most interesting characters in the Star Wars universe. The presented villain of this piece is an angry former Jedi. He's a remnant of the High Republic era, and has legitimate reasons to feel betrayed. But for someone who was allegedly a skilled fighter, he doesn't ever come across as a genuine threat. His right hand Ravis carries much more of a presence, thanks to his unusual physiology and a likeness to another imposing villain from a different Disney IP. There is at least an attempt to develop both of these beyond just bad guy, but something felt off about the boss entities outside of Ravis and the game's primary antagonist. All of these boss fights felt like they danced to the same rhythm, and while each presented a unique spectacle, they were uninteresting mechanically. The more memorable fights are those against wild creatures, or remnant droids from the Clone Wars, who exchange surprisingly entertaining dialogue for those pressed into service scrap metal units. These aren't intended to be big showpieces, but there's something entertaining about hearing a droid trash talk, only to be demolished by a single wave of Cal's hand. Overall, this game took me around 20 hours to finish the main narrative, with minimal to moderate side questing. I went back and did a lot of the extras after I finished the story. That wouldn't have usually been the case, but for some of the issues I'm going to get into later. There's no denying that this is quite a short experience if you mostly focus on that critical path, but it's also got an amazing story and better than average cinematography, along with excellent music. When I originally wrote about Fallen Order, I noted how the slow, deliberate, and somewhat clunky combat really helped develop Cal's character. I specifically meant this as a compliment, in that Respawn managed to get across Cal's apprentice status without hampering too much to the point where the game wasn't fun. This combat is only marginally different than that in Fallen Order, thanks to the new stances, that do include one with a blaster. My main issue is that because of the relative lack of major changes to combat in general, this now feels very restrictive. You can only equip 2 stances at once, and each stance feels very isolated from the other stances. I found myself just sticking with the default single blade and using the others sparingly depending on how I felt. I would have preferred if you could have switched to any of the 5 stances on the fly without needing to meditate to swap one of these out. You can put skill points into specific stances to give you some additional utility, but these tend to result in improvements on your existing abilities rather than giving you many new ones. Combat is perfectly serviceable, but it's not an impressive part of the game, outside of the sheer spectacle of it. When I look back at Fallen Order, it felt like another student at the school of Uncharted or Tomb Raider style traversal. Survivor's movement feels faster and more reactive than both of those games did. You aren't doing anything more than you were in those games, but there's a level of pace here that make things feel more modern. Particularly during the opening level when you do a lot of climbing and mantling, you'll notice a difference in transitioning between walls and ceilings, or Cal latching onto surfaces after a jump. This is still a very on-rails experience, like the Uncharted games are, but that's part of the intended design, and I could forgive it for that. Yet, there were a lot of times when I would reach part of a traversal puzzle, and couldn't see the intended next step. Because this was a very on-rails experience, there is usually only one right answer to the question of how to move forward. Most of my deaths were from throwing Cal towards a wall or into a space that it looked like it might be the way to go, only for him to ragdoll to the floor. Here is perhaps the best example of this. I reach the end of a ceiling hang and jump onto a rope. The environment doesn't show me an obvious route through which to travel. No wall or ledge looks like it's intended for me to connect onto. The actual solution is to toss yourself into the normal looking wall right in front of you and then slide down. But that certainly seemed like the wrong answer when I'm looking at it from this angle. Another place where I feel that Fallen Order lacked a lot was progression. Outside of the narrative, you were unable to progress Cal in meaningful ways. Instead, you had an abundance of cosmetic items as loot to dangle in front of players, as a non-story carrot to chase. This same phenomenon occurs here, where I found it hard to get excited by opening chests or seeing loot, because it rarely makes Cal more powerful. What I liked a lot here was the addition of perks, as these give you some customization in how Cal plays, and provided some gameplay affecting rewards for exploring or finishing a puzzle. Acquiring a new traversal tool, a stim upgrade, or a perk is the real draw of exploration for me, and there are enough of these around that you can forgive the few times that opening a chest is just a slightly more silver shade of metal for your lightsaber. This is helped massively by large open levels and strong environmental design that showcases the Star Wars universe quite well. When this is backed up by good PC hardware, this game can at times look amazing. And at others like someone forgot to draw the shadows properly. The fidelity on Cal and BD-1 demonstrate the ambition Respawn had to make this a truly cinematic Star Wars experience, and for the most part, this delivers on that aim. There's not too much more to say about the rest of this title in terms of gameplay, which is pretty much exactly what Fallen Order was. The explorable areas might be larger, the graphics might be a little better, and Cal might be a little older. But a lot of this is very familiar. One element I really did like was the addition of Greezer's Saloon. This is on Kobo and acts as your hub in this sector of the galaxy. It's a location where characters you meet in the world come and find refuge, and where you can listen to additional exposition and character dialogue. I particularly liked talking with Fisherman Scoov whenever he was out and about near a lake or pool, and he then meets you back at the saloon. Like the cosmetics you can loot, these aren't gameplay affecting, but certainly add some value to the universe, and are responsible for the bulk of these side quests. The characters you bring here all feel like lost souls that can provide some form of distraction from the impending Imperial threat. I'm probably overthinking this to a ridiculous degree, but I started to feel like bringing these people to Greezer's and getting them to work on little projects was a key part of helping Cal feel valued and distracted from his own troubled mental state. As much as it sounds like I feel that there are lots of elements of this game that could have been improved from Fallen Order, I was kind of happy with what we got here, and leaning strongly towards recommending this. At least I was, but this game's technical state pretty much tied my hands. The game performed poorly, and I say that knowing my experience seems to be better than most of those expressing their discontent online. For around half of my playthrough, this held at 45 FPS, which is playable when it's stable. At other times, this number dropped hard, and the game ran sluggishly, either unwilling or unable to use my hardware to its full potential. The aforementioned Greaser Saloon and the town area around it in Kobo were the worst offenders. And that's not good. It's the place you're supposed to come back to frequently. Added to this was the frequent crashing that occurred, coupled with this being the type of game where you need to reach specific locations to save. Jeddah, the third planet you visit, seemed to be the biggest culprit. Every folder you see here represents one such instance, proving just how disruptive this was. Admittedly, this did seem to be resolved on my system following the installation of NVIDIA driver 531.79, which released on the 5th of May. I've heard many other accounts of solutions to this issue, but I can only verify what worked for me. A performance patch released on the 10th of May also addressed certain other issues, but I'd at least managed to clear the story prior to that point. The biggest shame here is that Jedi Survivor is at least as good as its predecessor, and in some ways, it is significantly better. Lying under all these technical problems is a great Metroidvania, with a lot of sprinkling and dustings of that raw Star Wars magic that makes it the type of adventure that is incredibly appealing. I don't say lightly that this could have been in contention for Game of the Year honours, if not for this technical state. Speaking of awards though, Cameron Monaghan is likely going to win multiple of these for his performance as Cal. He was beyond excellent. The Star Wars fan in me really likes what's been put into this game, from the characters, the story, the world to explore. Yet, if you're looking to pick this up, you do need to do your patch research and check your driver versions. And also be willing to roll the dice a little bit, as playability on PC is still a massive, massive issue.